Disclaimer. Opinions expressed are those of the content creators and do not represent any employer or entity. The information shared is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice or used in any legal capacity, including establishing standards of care. All efforts have been made to comply with HIPAA regulations. No guarantees are made regarding the accuracy of statements or opinions provided. Interaction with the podcast does not establish a doctor-patient relationship. Please enjoy this podcast responsibly.
Welcome back to another episode of Pod Patrol with your host, Dr. Jeff Dikis. Today, we are joined by a very special guest who happens to be my wife, Dr. Ashley Dikis. Thank you for agreeing to join me.
You're welcome. I don't know. I don't know if I had a choice in the matter, but I'm excited to be here.
Well, you had a choice, but
sure.
We'll see. We'll see if you regret it or not.
That's more appropriate.
All right, so let's take people back to when you and I first met and then walk it forward. So, do you have a memory of when we first met?
I just remember that we were in a study group. One of our DPM classmates, Devin Simonson, and then two of our other classmates, and Devin brought you around to our study group, and I just thought that you were kind of a slacker, if I'm going to be honest. You were just, we were there early in the morning and late at night, and we were there on Saturdays, and we were, all in, and you were like, hey, there's an Iowa football game on. I won't be joining you tomorrow. And
I had my priorities straight. There's only one of those things that mattered.
I don't know if he's a good addition to the group. I had my early doubts.
I don't know if I passed those tests, but I do know whether the Hawks won or not.
Yeah, I'm sure you remember all the statistics. Yes, it's very important.
Long forgotten, I'm sure. So we were in a study group together and then started dating, and then came the time to try to figure out what the next step would be in terms of going to residency. So that became a little bit tricky for us being a couple in podiatry, trying to figure out how that would work, because back then they didn't have the couples match. So you and I kind of spent long hours trying to figure out where we should go, which programs we should go to, and ultimately ended up matching to UPMC, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, luckily together. So what are your recollections of when we were kind of spending our fourth year at different programs? We purposely went to different programs. We were never at the same program at the same time. Even though we wanted to be together, we didn't want to have this, stick in people's minds that we were a package deal. So What are your recollections from fourth year of going out there and indicating that we were a couple, but trying to make it clear that we weren't necessarily a package deal, all or nothing?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. I get asked this question a lot by students. There are lots of student couples out there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's really the key, is demonstrating that you are valuable and would be a great resident for the program, regardless of whether they chose to take your significant other or not. And I think that's what we wanted, because obviously what matters at the end of the day is that you both get a residency program. It's maybe the ideal situation if you could be in the same place. But I think we went into it with the understanding and being okay with the fact that we might not, and that at the end of the day, it really just mattered most that we got a great, residency training experience, even if we weren't the same place.
So what would you say to someone who ends up matching at two different programs? What kind of advice would you give for them? Because it depends on the residency, but some of them are much more time consuming than others. So what advice would you have for students who end up not matching at the same program?
Well, I mean, I'd say that even during our residency experience, we had co-residents who were in relationships with other residents who did match at other programs, and they were absolutely able, to make that work. I think that even if you're at the same program, I mean, we were at the same program, and we rarely cross paths actually at work.
Yeah.
To this day, we've still never scrubbed a case together, been in the
Yeah.
OR
Right.
together, which is kind of wild to think about.
Yeah.
And certainly, obviously, it's nice to have that support system at the end of the day, after those long days. But there were some rotations too where we were like, ships passing in the night more so than anything.
Yeah.
So it's definitely doable. And again, it's 3 years, and you can't get that back, right? You only hopefully you do that once, right? That's your one chance for a great residency experience. And so I think that I think it's still something that should be that priority. Obviously, you want to maintain your relationship, but I think it's absolutely possible to do that successfully. And we've seen evidence of others who've been able to do
Yeah.
that.
So do you think if we were in the OR together, I would be telling you what to do or you'd be telling me what to do?
Oh, it'd be chaos. I don't let's just hope it never happens. That's like, oh, that's worlds colliding. I don't think we need to go there. So,
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's worlds
yeah.
colliding. It's
Mhm.
better to keep things kind of separate. And I've got
Yeah.
my own OR staff and playlist, and you've got your own thing going on. So
Yeah,
I don't
we
know.
probably
Better to
drive each
keep
other
those worlds
nuts.
separate, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, people ask all the time, "Oh, why don't you and your husband work together?" And I think that's
Hmm.
obviously not just medicine, that's in any realm, if some couples, obviously that's their preference, but that'd be a lot of together. I think it's better this way for
A
us.
lot of togetherness.
Yeah.
So let's fast forward a little bit. So we were both in residency together, and we were discussing when the best time to start a family might be. And we were talking about this on the previous podcast with our residency director, Dr. Burns. And if you think too hard, you might say never, because you think, well, is it during school? Well, that'd be tough. Residency? Ooh, I'm super busy. As a new attending? Oh no, I've got my own patients I got to take care of. So there really isn't a great time. So what was going through your mind knowing that you were going to have to do 99.9% of the work
Mhm.
on the front end?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think that's just it, is that one, there's not a perfect time. And again, regardless of whether you're in medicine or not, but then also that you don't necessarily have control over when that does actually happen, right? You can plan as best you can. I think, for us, luckily it worked out well from a timing standpoint, but we also knew that just the way our residency program was structured as well, that it needed to be, more so during that third year, as opposed to, other programs may do things differently. But from our standpoint, that was important. I wanted to make sure that I had made it through the bulk of training before that time came.
Mhm.
Because, even some of those later months when I was still working, it was hard, right? Like there were some things that
Yeah.
they were difficult to do, and that some of those days were challenging. So,
I mean, those are
uh,
long days as someone who isn't pregnant, who isn't,
yeah.
consuming calories for 1.5 or 2, whatever you
Mhm.
want to call it, and hiking stairs and rounding early and staying late. And that's hard for
Mhm.
anybody, let alone someone who's pregnant trying to do that. So, I mean, what are your recollections of being pregnant as a resident?
Yeah, overall, again, I was lucky in that I had a pretty smooth pregnancy too, right? That's the other piece of this puzzle is, maybe you work out the timing just right, and it all, you excited that part of it happens, but then
Yeah.
maybe it's not a smooth pregnancy, right? Like overall, I had a pretty smooth pregnancy, which helped.
Yeah.
And I had a lot of help in the sense that we were at a residency program that had 6 residents per year, and we had such great co-residents, and
Yeah.
everybody was willing to jump in and help. So I certainly think that helped, but definitely it was, a different level of tired, going through that, and just physically, especially like wearing lead in the OR, like,
Yeah.
now already it feels you get towards the end of a case where you've been wearing lead for an extended period of time and you're just so ready to have it off.
Your back hurts and you're tired, you're sweaty. Now add
Yeah. Though
poundage under there and sweatiness.
absolutely. Though I will say that I still think that I did my best ankle arthroscopy when I had that big bump, because I could just like push
Just
the
your hand,
foot. Yeah, it
put
was
your
so
hands up
perfect.
there
Yeah.
and just, yeah.
Yeah. Just prop it up. But no, it was, it was definitely challenging, and the very end of it was slowing me down for sure. There's no doubt.
I mean, I don't see how it couldn't, right?
Right.
I mean, you're just worn out from bending over to pick something up. You're out of breath.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
the physical nature of pregnancy is demanding. So, um, I told the story on an earlier episode about how you were rounding. It was infectious disease, right?
Mm-hmm.
Rounding on infectious disease that day. So I don't know. What are your memories of being a resident, working hard, rounding in the hospital, and then, oh, by the way, oh yeah, let me swing by the 5th floor and have a kid real quick.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really long day. I actually that morning had covered um, some orthopedic trauma cases that had come in. I
Yeah.
remember I had jumped from one rotation, jumped in and covered like 2 cases, and then jumped back into my infectious disease rotation for the afternoon. And I think it was my first day on that rotation as well. So I'm sure they saw me and were just like, "Oh boy."
You're going to be a lot of
um,
help.
yeah, I know. Um, yeah, I mean, it was definitely one of those like fully 12-hour days. And then I finally got home and was so excited just to like lay on the couch, and there
Not for
there
long.
things went. Yeah,
Not
and
for
you
long.
weren't home. You were still covering
Yeah.
cases in the
I was in ortho trauma.
Mhm. It was a long day, but it all
Yeah.
worked out.
It did all work out. And so we ended up having a son, our first son. And then how did your life change at that point? I don't really remember how much time you took off or how that worked, because luckily or unluckily for me, I suppose, I was still there and could kind of pick up some of your responsibilities as a resident, because I didn't think it was
Mhm.
fair to just dump that on the other residents. They didn't sign up for
Right.
this. So I felt it was a little bit of my duty to kind of swing in and say, don't worry about it. I got it. I'll cover this. You got some call. Okay. Let me take care of that. And so what is your recollection of having a newborn and still being a resident?
It feels like, if honestly, it feels like such a haze. I barely remember it, if I'm being honest, because it was, I mean, again, we were used to late nights and waking up overnight and the pager going off and all of those things.
Yeah. The pager
And
just had a different sound. It sounded like a
it
crying
did.
baby.
Yes, it did. And
Different
again, it
wake
was
up call.
hard. Yeah, it's hard. We're living in like a condo and we're trying to like let you sleep because you're still working, and I'm getting up with the baby. And again, I think I took just over 6 weeks off.
Hmm.
And that's hard too, to go back to work with that tiny of a baby, dropping him off at daycare. But um
Yeah.
it was just a different type of hard. You just kind of
Yeah.
switch from one type of hard to another. But that's kind of the process again, whether you're doing what we were doing at the time and going through residency. I think I was lucky that I was heading towards the end of residency. There were still some really tough, busy rotations left. And
Hmm.
I spent my first Mother's Day in the OR with an open ankle. But it's just,
Yeah.
it's, you just kind of get through it, right?
It's a
It's
different
like when
life,
you're,
that's for sure.
it is, right? It's like, just like when you're a student and you start taking biochem and all these courses, and you just think like, how am I ever going to get in some kind of a groove and get used to this? And it's too much. And then all of, a month or two in, you find your groove, and it was the same in some ways. Yeah.
Or in our case, all of a sudden 10, 15 years has gone by and
I know.
blink, and then all of a sudden you're on
Mhm.
the other
Yeah.
side of it. So
Yeah.
I guess that's a sign we had fun, right? They
Oh, I
say
think
time
so.
time flies when you're having fun.
That's right.
So you took 6 weeks off. If you could go
Mhm.
back and do it again, because I think there's a little bit of confliction there, in that you want to take an appropriate amount of time off for yourself and for the baby. But during that time, someone else, me or otherwise, is
Mhm.
covering for you a little bit. So you almost feel a little bit guilty of taking any excess time. So what would you say to someone when they're trying to figure out the amount of time to take off? And maybe there isn't a right answer. Maybe that's just too hard to answer. But do you remember
Yeah.
what you were thinking when you were trying to figure out how much time to take off?
Well, I mean, technically for that, it's either going to be 6 or 8 weeks, depending upon how your delivery goes, of how much time, you're kind of allotted off. And that's pretty standard. Um, I think the biggest consideration when you're a resident, though, is, what rotations are you missing and how is that going to affect your graduation date, right? So if you want to graduate with your class, what do you have to make up? And is that possible to do that within the confines of still your 3-year time frame? Otherwise it may mean staying an extra month if your program will allow that. And that is challenging for the program in a different way too.
Sure.
So I think that's the biggest consideration at that point. If you're going to have a baby during residency, you really are looking at a more, that kind of shorter end of the time frame. A lot of it because of you need to still, get through all of your required rotations.
Yeah, makes sense. And so after residency, we moved to Tennessee. And if we thought it was hard to both make it through school, both match to a top residency, it was probably even harder, at least initially, to find 2 good quality jobs in a similar area. I think some people find that it's hard enough to get one job in an area that's desirable. And we were trying to find 2. So why don't you walk us through kind of what you were thinking? Because, maybe you could have been the one who went and got a job and then I stayed home with our son, or vice versa. But what was your recollection of that thought process when we did end up moving to Tennessee?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the question, right? Is that now we're both exiting out of this time frame with literally the same education, right? We went to the same school, we went to the same residency program. So, all things considered, we had that same, experience and whatnot.
One of us got much better grades. I'm not going to say who. The people will know.
Okay.
And I hope they vote for me.
Keep that to ourselves.
One of us had much better grades than the other one.
And, I think we had about 1 million conversations about where we were going to go and how that was going to look. But I think we just looked at it and said, one of us, we have to focus on the one job and then basically see what we can find in the area for the second person. So it was all about finding that one position that was going to hopefully work out, knowing that obviously we can do just fine on one of our salaries, right? And then that maybe buys us a little bit of time to find that second job. And then also the fact that at the time our son was 3-4 months old when we graduated residency. And so, so that was also very early in that time frame. So it worked out timing wise for one of us to be a little bit more flexible as well.
So we moved to Tennessee and I started my job at an orthopedic group, and you were kind of looking around for jobs in the area. We didn't want to be competing, so we didn't want to be in too close of a radius of each other. Then we're essentially competing with each other, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So you were looking at outside of a certain radius. So how did you end up getting your job?
It's kind of amazing, honestly, how it worked out. Like you said, we were kind of looking at what are some other communities in the area that would potentially be in need of a podiatrist. And so I started looking and found a community that was about 45 minutes away from where you practiced, which seemed like a good space as far as overlap goes.
Yeah.
And I just looked on their website and I saw that they didn't have a podiatrist on staff. And I emailed the CEO of the hospital and I said, would you be interested in podiatrist? They said, yes, we would be interested. And I went and interviewed, and kind of the rest was history. And it's looking back, amazing to me that that's how the whole situation came up, because it ended up being such a good job and such a good experience.
And that was your first place that you reached out to, right?
It was the first place.
The first and ended up being the only. It was almost like meant to be. If you believe in that kind of thing, like serendipity or meant to be or something, fate, any of that stuff. I mean, it's almost like you can't make that up. Feels kind of like, wow, that's a little too perfect. So you ended up working at competing, but not really competing based on the distance away from me, a different orthopedic group. And so it was you and a bunch of male orthopedic doctors.
Mhm.
In our field, sometimes we butt heads with orthopedics, and sometimes we're best friends. I am great friends with my orthopedic colleague in my office, and we get along perfectly. And you ended up getting along so well with your male orthopedic colleague. So, what are your thoughts on being a female in not only podiatry and being a surgeon, but being surrounded by orthopedics, which is maybe one of the more typically historically male centric specialties, maybe
Mhm.
changing with times, but typically a more male centric dominated specialty. How did you feel that worked out?
I mean, as you mentioned, my experience was extremely positive, you know, and even looking back through our residency training, I had very positive experiences with our male orthopedic attendings. I never
Yeah.
felt like that was anything, um, you know, that was problematic. I think that, you know, ultimately, if you go and you are pleasant and you do a good job, right? I think I just kind of hopefully showed up and did as best as I could and tried to take care of the patients. And
Mhm.
um, that ended up just being, it just worked out all right. You know, I mean, I don't really think that it was something that I thought about a lot of being like, well, they're, you know, in the middle of the boys club kind of thing.
Mhm.
It definitely was never that kind of a environment. I think there were definitely times that I can remember starting out just thinking, as I move through this, if I do the best job that I can and I show up and I work hard, like what issue can people take with that, right? Like
Right.
what can somebody have to, you know, argue with that? So that was just my approach, and you know,
Well,
like I
and
said, I had a really good experience.
you're kind of hard to dislike. I may be biased. I may be biased. You're kind of hard to dislike. Like
You better like me, I know.
yeah, I suppose we're stuck now, but
Yeah.
I guess that probably helps, right? Going in with a good attitude, and it helps to be smart and well trained, and
Mhm.
check all the boxes that they're gonna trust you, right? Have a respect factor there,
Mhm.
to be able to help in their orthopedic group and help
Mhm.
with the patients that are technically their patients.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you can't enter into it with any kind of like that sense of having a chip on your shoulder of making, you know, some kind of judgment prior to of how they're going to treat you because of X, Y, or Z. You know, I think they're all just kind of wonderful human beings and were kind and
Yeah,
you know, it just was a positive working experience and working environment. And that's really what everyone wants, right? Ultimately, I think most people do. There are those out there who have, you know, become a bit jaded by their medical careers, and maybe that's not the case. But for the most
yeah,
part, you know, most people want to get along with the people that they work with and they see every day. And those guys were stuck in that office with me, so
yeah.
it worked out, I think, better for everyone that we all got along.
So I think the most interesting part of that story is what happened when we were actually, had one foot out the door when we were looking to move back to Iowa, was that there was a messy situation of large hospital group acquiring other hospital, which was then acquired by an even larger hospital group. And at that point, you're no longer working for the people that hired you. You are,
Mhm.
but you're really working for some person who's never met you. You're a number on a piece of paper that's very easy to draw a line through. Like, well, we don't need to pay for that. Whoop, we don't need to pay for that. And that was what was going to happen, right?
Mhm.
Word came down that they were going to start getting rid of podiatry in this health system, and they ended up getting rid of the two other podiatrists there.
Mhm. Yeah,
But
unfortunately.
what what was your recollection of that? Because those guys went to bat for you. They said, no, 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 this is not going down that way.
Yeah, again, I mean, I think that just I think spoke to not just those that were in the kind of orthopedic section of the medical group, but you know, other members as well. You know, and our chief medical officer and others at the hospital who they went to bat on my behalf, and you know, that's something that I'll always be grateful for because that again, it really meant a lot to me, and it's solidified that, okay, hey, they think that I am valuable part of the team. And I think that you'll find that those you can find those really good situations. I guess that's what this story tells, right? Is that like there are really positive, great working scenarios out there. I think
Yeah.
again, as I kind of mentioned before, I think a lot of people do get really kind of beat down by the system. There are hard things about the medical and healthcare systems, and it's easy to get kind of jaded about the whole thing. And not everybody has a positive experience, unfortunately, but there are a lot of really good, working situations out there. And sometimes you have to be open to trying something a little different too, right? Like we were not initially had our, heart set on heading to East Tennessee.
Right.
But we're so glad that that's the way that, things ended up.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting because we didn't intend to do that. And then we always said, hey, if we could do this all over again, we'd go do that again. That was awesome. That was fun.
Absolutely.
Smoky Mountains. I mean, good place to raise a family, super nice people. I mean, that was great. So
Mhm.
I do want to touch on one thing, though, real quick, because this might be a good place to jump into it. Being in that male dominated orthopedic group, whatever you want to say, and then you come to find out how well respected you were amongst your peers at that hospital. You and I have talked about this before in dealing with imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
Imposter syndrome, you can describe it better than I can. But basically, that thought of like, why me? Why would someone want me? Why would they hire me? I'm not qualified for this. I'm not good enough for this, and dealing with that. Did any of that kind of reinforce, you know what? No, I am good. I am good at what I do. Does that factor in, or can you talk about that a little bit? Because I don't fully understand what that is quite like.
You- you're,
I'm an imposter. Of all the imposters, I am the imposter, but I don't think that I'm the
you're like,
imposter. I have the
I don't know
opposite.
how people feel that way because I feel confident all the time.
Well, I'm pretty
No.
great, so why wouldn't they think I'm great?
You're like, I've heard of this imposter syndrome thing. No, I mean, I think that it's very normal, is the thing, is for a lot of people, especially when you're first out in practice. It does not matter how well you did in school, how great of a residency program you had, maybe you did a fellowship, maybe you've done all of these things, you've got this great job. It is hard when you're first out in practice. It will make you doubt yourself. It
Yeah.
will, right? I mean, and definitely I 100% had lots of moments early on where I was just like, at some point, they're all going to figure out
Yeah.
that maybe I'm not as smart as they
Yeah.
think that I am. And I think it's hard because you are trying to figure things out. And, it's more so kind of what your preferences are and how you want to function and the way that you want to approach things. And you've gone through your residency training and seen all these great examples, but it's trying to then take that and make it your own. Because I mean, that's the crazy thing. Like we are literally in the same specialty. We went to the same school, we had the same residency program. And there are still a lot of things that you and I both do differently in practice,
Yeah.
which is kind of wild, right? So it shows that there is a lot of growth early on where you have to figure things out. And I had lots of experiences early on where you get that call from the, ED about a patient. And then afterwards be like, oh, should I have done this instead? Should I have done that? Gosh, I should call them back. Or,
Yeah.
frantically checking, rechecking labs and checking x-rays. And, those are the times that I think sometimes you feel like when you graduate residency, that should mean that you are fully formed.
Yeah.
You have arrived, all, you've gone through all the training. But I think a lot of people underestimate how much you are learning constantly as you go through. And especially, I think those first 6 months in practice, you learn a lot.
Yeah.
There's still a lot to learn. I definitely still learn things every single day now, or things surprise me, or something pops up that I'm like, I don't know the answer to that, or
Mhm.
I'm not quite sure how to approach that. But now I think as you move through practice and you gain some of that confidence and you have examples of how, yeah, I did know what I was doing. I do know how to do that. That starts to fade. And you start to recognize, that you can rely on your training and that you do, have that ability. But it's hard. This, like I said, especially those first 6 months, I think, are just
Yeah.
really challenging.
Well, you get a little panicked and you're just like,
Yeah.
yeah, do that. And then you hang up and you're like, I didn't tell him to get a CT scan. I
Yeah.
didn't tell him to be MPO. Like, if someone was asking me a question, I would rattle those off, no problem. And then the
Mhm.
actual ED calls and you're like, oh, I don't, oh.
Com
And then,
Complete panic.
3 times later, you're like, okay,
Yeah.
this again. Yeah. Okay. All right. We
Mhm.
know what to do. Okay. Do that. So
Yeah,
I think there's some comfortability, just like anything. The more you do it, the more you
absolutely.
get comfortable with that. But I think battling against yourself, you don't need any other uphill battles. You're a young attending, you're a mom, you got a doofus husband you're stuck with. Yeah, I feel bad for you.
Challenges, yes.
And then you doubt yourself. Well, you don't need yourself pushing against yourself. There's enough other obstacles out there that you don't need to be an additional obstacle.
Mhm.
But it's easier said than done. I could tell you like, nah, I think you're smart. I think you do a good job. And you're like, yeah, this guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. So,
Yeah.
you know, do you think you're more ready to, I don't know how to word it. So do you think imposter syndrome just goes away with time, or do you think it changes? Or is it a mindset? Or what do you think
Mhm.
people can do to fight against that? Because, like I said, you don't need another thing pushing against you, especially yourself.
Right. No, and I think that, it's I hear about this from students, right? Like in my current role, even on the student level, you start school and it's hard when things are really hard. Like I think it's hard to sit back and remember like this is supposed to be hard. Like this is going to be hard. That is part of this. And it's really challenging, I think, when you have always maybe things have academically or whatever it may be come a little bit more easily to you. And then all of a sudden, entering into a medical training is like, it's a bit like hitting a brick wall, right? Like
Hmm.
it's like, ooh, okay, this is something different. And I think when you enter out into practice, you kind of hit that wall again of like, ooh, I think I know. I thought I had everything figured out, but now
Yeah.
that I'm here, I'm realizing there's so much more. It's really an extension of training as you're in those first couple of years in so many
Hmm.
ways because it's different types of things you're learning, right? It's like how the whole system works of like maybe in residency, you weren't the one who before surgery needed to go sign the patient and talk to them beforehand or like do certain things that only the attendings can do, and now you're doing that and you're doing everything start to finish. There's so many things, paperwork,
Yeah.
there's so many things related to all of that are so hard. So I think when it comes to the imposter syndrome kind of aspect of things, I do think that so much of it is having to remind yourself of all those examples of the situations where you thought maybe you didn't know what you were doing or, you know, doubted yourself. And then you start to have examples basically that build up of, yeah, I do know what I'm doing. And I can see that now. So much of it's in retrospect though, unfortunately. So I guess I don't know if it 100% ever goes away because there's certainly always going to be those moments of doubt. If you're never doubting yourself, maybe that's something you have to look at too, right?
Yeah.
But I think it probably always sticks with you to some extent, and I think for a lot of people who go into again medicine, there's a certain personality as well that kind of high achieving personality that maybe is a little bit more prone to that too.
Hmm. Yeah, I think so. Perfectionist.
Yeah.
So let's tell the story of how we ended up in Iowa. Because at the
Mhm.
time, it wasn't very hilarious, but
No.
I think it was funny, at least in retrospect. So we were looking to leave Tennessee and come back to Iowa, and you had always thought or had an inkling that you would want to teach at the school someday. And so obviously that involves, in our case, coming back to Des Moines because we like Iowa and that's where the school is. Um, but I suppose we could have moved to a different city. But anyways, we're looking to move back to Des Moines. And I'm trying to think of what happened first. I think one of the jobs that I was interested had kind of popped open and then they weren't interviewing anymore. And then a job at the school popped open and you applied for that.
Hmm.
And on paper, I think you're kind of a home run. You got whatever, good grades, good residency, orthopedic clinic experience. You're an imposter. You don't belong there, but on paper you look pretty good until they all figure it out.
Right.
And then so you applied for the job, and we kind of thought, all right, well, you're really good on paper. Why wouldn't they want to hire you? And so I remember we were sitting in the Dick's Sporting Goods parking lot, and your phone rang, and it was Dean Yoho. And I was like, oh, you're going to get hired. And you picked up the phone and you started talking to him, and you kind of went, oh, okay. Yeah, no, I understand. And I thought, what? You didn't get the job? How is that even possible? And so they ended up hiring Sean Grambart, past ACFAS president, lovely, charismatic. We love him, Sean Grambart. And we thought, well, yeah, okay, that makes sense. They had to hire him because you spent a month with him. I always tell people it would have been weird if they hired the student that rotated with the attending instead of the attending. Like, yeah, we're going to go in another direction. We got this young and up and comer. They're like, no, she was my student. How can you hire her?
I know.
Yeah, so
on
they
no planet anywhere would anyone hire me over Sean Grambart. Yes.
Right. It made sense, right? So
absolutely.
He ended up taking the job. And then later on, I got my current job. It popped, a great job at a multi-specialty clinic in Iowa, popped open. I interviewed. I was lucky enough to get it. We're like, all right, here we go. We're moving. Well, we're moving again twice where I have a job and you don't. Again, very difficult to find two great jobs in the same area. And we figured this is a great opportunity. Let's just go. We'll make it work. So we move our family across the country. And then what happened? What's your recollection of what happened at that point?
I just remember that we were living at your parents' house as we're waiting for to close on our house. Like we're living that transition life.
We went backwards a little bit. They say like you moved into your mom's basement. Like we did that. We
did.
Moved back in.
We did. And Dr. Yoho reached out. They had another faculty member who had moved on to a new position. And so they had another faculty position open up, which, it certainly isn't something that happens every day that there's a new faculty position open. And so for there to be another one, pop up, it was, I was just so excited to hear that. Right.
That was so like 4 months after I started, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah.
So not long.
No, but it put me in an interesting position where, again, I had all these like small breaks in things, right? Because I had that 6 weeks in residency where I was away from work. And so getting back into work, you're a little rusty. And then again, a maternity leave while we were in Tennessee. And then now had this time frame when we moved from Tennessee to Iowa, where I was off home all day with the kids, which is another kind of hard.
Home, but not home.
Yeah, I know. Home in your parents' house with our kids. So anyway, and it was just, the timing ended up being perfect for us. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what kind of drew you to academics? Because that's a very different job than what we have typically done. We were both at orthopedic groups. I'm now at a multi-specialty clinic. Some people work for hospitals or private practice. But academics is very different. So what drew you to academics or higher, even whatever you want to call it, higher education or whatever, but teaching at the school and academics, what drew you to that?
Yeah. Well, I'm imposter, right? And if you can't do, then you teach. Isn't that what the adage is? So
yeah,
no.
I never thought of it that way.
I know.
That makes a whole lot of sense.
I even when we were students, I think I just looked to the faculty and just, I don't know. I was drawn to that. I think I saw how much of an impact they had on us, right? Because they really did. And, sometimes people, joke about the things that students learn in school and, it's obviously it's not residency, right? It's not at that level of your education, but, that our faculty had a huge impact on me, a positive impact. And I just thought, I think that's really kind of cool that they get to do that every day, right? To interact with students and be a part of people's journey. And so
Yeah.
that really appealed to me.
I think they
So that's
get
really where
taken.
kind of initial thought.
I think they get taken for granted a little bit. I think people just assume like, oh yeah, you're a teacher, you're here to teach me. And it's like, I don't have to be here. I could be somewhere else. I could be at a different job, uh, uh, a much less headache job. You know, you guys cause me all kinds of headaches. Like, don't take me for granted. Right.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that's true or not, but I think any academics, you know, you're in high school or something like, well, that's just a science teacher. Like, no, they're showing up, they're trying to make you smarter. And,
Mhm.
you know, I'm talking in the back of the room and, you know, getting yelled at and sent to in school suspension for not shutting my mouth. True story. But, you know, what do you think about that? Do you think um, professors get taken for granted, or do you think that I'm off base there?
No, I mean, I just think that it's so hard, again, especially in when you're in that level and in medical school. Those students have so much pressure on them, and there is so much on their plate. They are so tired. We lived it, right? It's hard.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, you're just so focused on getting yourself through it. And sometimes there are things that the professors do or the things that the school does that don't make sense to you. And now that I'm on the other side of it, I realize it's because there's just things you don't know, right? And so it's not their fault that the students get frustrated with certain things or they don't understand. It's just they don't have all the information. And now being on the other side of it, you're like, well, of course we do it this way because that's
Hmm.
a CPME requirement, or that's because of this thing that relates to this other part of the university, or whatever it may be. And so I think there's always that pull and tug between, you know, the
There's also,
administrative side of things
yeah,
and students. So
there's also a little bit of a generational thing. They
sure.
seem to think that they get a vote. Like, you don't get a vote. Pipe down. I'll let you know how it's going to be. You don't get a vote. Be quiet. Everyone
Well,
thinks they get a vote. No, I'll let you know when you get a vote.
I think that it is hard because things change with time,
Hmm.
right? Um, and rightly so. There are a lot of things that should change, but I think most of us lean back on what our experience was like as a student, as a resident, right? I think medicine is famous for that, of
Oh
like,
yeah. Oh yeah.
well, I had to work 120 hours a week, so you're going to do it. Or I had to do this, so that means you have to do it. And it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, but remember how terrible that was? Like, maybe wouldn't it be awesome if you could just have like
Right.
a more normal experience and not be put through that thing that probably was, you're probably sleep deprived and dangerous.
Yeah.
So I think that that's kind of it's a tricky spot. You're right. There are certainly, you know, people in many different stages of their career, and that interacts differently with the students each year.
So let's take people through a day in the life, because I don't even know what you do. We say goodbye, and then I'm like, "What you do all day?" I don't know. She was off somewhere, and I was off the other direction. So
Mhm.
let's take people through a day in the life, working at Des Moines University Podiatry School. So you wake up in the morning. We got two kids to get ready. We're trying to get them out the door, dressed. Got a dog. Got
Mhm.
all kinds of stuff going on, but let's ignore that stuff because everyone's
Yeah.
got these little tiny things they deal with. But after
Mhm.
that, what is your typical every day of the week is different for you, right?
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah,
So
it is. I mean, I think that's the hard thing, is that there really isn't a typical day per se, which is part of what I like about, academia and this job, is that there is a lot of variety. Because on any given day, like, yes, there's some consistency in which days I'm in clinic, but outside of that, everything else fluctuates. And so different days I'll be in surgery, and different days that I'll have lectures or labs. Some weeks that I'm on call, maybe beforehand, then I'm going to go meet the residents, at the hospital and round before we get started. You know, as a faculty member, you're involved in a lot of committees. And so there's lots of kind of service aspects of that as well. And so that all just varies a lot. Some weeks you have a lot of prep to do for new lectures or whatnot. And, other times, maybe you're in more of a lull and you don't have as many, ongoing lectures. And so maybe you're doing more research. And so you're meeting with students, and
yeah.
certain times of the year are heavier to meet with your student advisees than others. And So it absolutely is it's just different every single day.
And you're also the clinic director. So you oversee the foot and ankle clinic for Des Moines University. So you have responsibilities there. You're working with the residents. You're involved in the residents of the Des Moines program and their academics. And we spend some time with them, and then working with the students as well. And all. And by the way, are you doing something else? Did you do something silly, like try to get your master's?
I know I'm a glutton for punishment. I don't know. Yeah. So then I'm also currently a student myself at Iowa State University, getting my master's in higher education administration. So that's my evening and weekend work.
So the student became the teacher who became the student. You went backwards.
I did. So yeah.
So that's a lot on your plate. So you must have a really, really good husband who, helps out and does a lot of things.
Something like that.
Right?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah, he's all right.
All right. So, I mean, what are your career goals? What are your aspirations? Are you happy with your current job? Are you satisfied with your, with being at the school? Because you go back to get your master's, and that infers some amount of lifelong academia. So you seem to enjoy your job with the students and teaching. There's some headaches that come along with it. I think headaches come along with any job. I've got headaches. I don't work at the school.
Yeah. Yeah. Whether you work in medicine or not, or whatever you do, I think you're right, every job has those headaches. So no, I mean, I think I just obviously I will say that very much I enjoy my job. If Dean Smith is listening, especially if I enjoy my job very much. Thank you.
Don't fire me.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think obviously doing something like the master's and whatnot, I certainly enjoy academia, and that's where I plan to hopefully stay for the long term, however that looks like. I mean, there's so many different aspects of how you can be involved in different roles within universities, and I mean, it's really amazing. I think that's something that, we were students, we were at DMU, and there are so many behind the scenes pieces that you just have no idea of what's all going on. And so that's been really interesting, between, actually learning it at work on the job, but then also, the coursework that I've taken, learning about how it all works. It's very interesting.
So you told me that 2024 was going to be the year of no.
Yeah.
The year of saying no. When someone comes and asks you, hey, will you do this? Will you volunteer for that? Will you come over here? No, I will not.
Yeah.
How's that going for you?
I think it's going okay. I won't say that it's been a complete year of no. But it's at least been more of a year of I need to pause and really be kind of mindful of that. We had a rocky start to the year, and some family things going on, and so I think it definitely puts in perspective how valuable your time is, and also managing stress levels and just trying to make it all work, right? And so I think that I am definitely somebody who has a tendency to want to be involved in everything. Maybe I'm just nosy, I don't know, but I just find myself like wanting to jump in and be involved in a lot of things. And I did tell myself that this year I was going to take a beat before I jumped into anything new. And so that's still my goal. We'll see how the year of no goes.
I think that's a good goal, because everyone has a limit. Everyone has, when you go through the line at Thanksgiving and you get a little this and a little that and a little more of that, I fit a little bit more on the side over there. I can go up a few more layers, but eventually your plate's full. Eventually stuff's going to fall on the floor, and all the stuff that's on your plate doesn't taste very good anymore because it's getting all mixed together. And I don't know if that's a good analogy or not. It's too much.
It is. I mean, it's just too much, right? And I think that at some point too, you start to realize too that you're doing a disservice, whether that's you're seeing too many patients in a day, at some point everyone hits that amount, that limit where they're like, I recognize that I maybe cannot do as good of a job as I want to do if I go beyond this amount or whatever that may look like. And I know that I can hit a point where I'm not able to give things that I have, dedicated myself to doing my full attention or do as well as I'd like to. And I certainly don't want, either family or work, the students, whoever it may be, to suffer because I can't, can only do so much.
Yeah, you do that with, committees and volunteer things. I do that with patient volumes. They got me loaded up and they're like, hey, can we add on this? Like, yep, okay, fine. What about that one? Yep, squeeze them in. Oh, here we go. We got 3 more. Oh, we got 5 more ingrown nails and an ankle fracture. And I had 2 Achilles tendon ruptures today. Okay, fine. Squeeze them in. And then I'm running behind and it's not fair to the patients who made their appointment a month ago. And they're wondering, why is this dumb taking so long? It better be worth it. And at some point, patient care suffers because they got me double booked, triple booked, back to back, double booked. I'm like, physically, I can't be in all of these rooms at the same time. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And so you tend to do that with your stuff, and I tend to do that with my patient loads. But I think there's, a desire to make people happy. And like you said, at some point, the quality suffers and you're no longer doing a good thing. You're ended up doing a not so good thing, even though your intention is good. So I think the year of the no is a good thing for you. It's a good way to say, you know what? I do enough. You want to see it all? I got it all. You want to check my planner? You want to check my calendar? I can prove it. I do a lot of things. And just feeling comfortable in the fact that, you know what? I do a lot of things already. I don't need to do this or that or the other thing. But what I fall into is why I ended up taking a lot of things on is that, who I trust is me, right? It's not that I don't trust anyone else, but I know I trust me. If I say I'm going to get it done, I know I'm going to get it done. And I know you're the same way. And so you trust you. And I think you and I trust each other, luckily. But you trust yourself to do a good job. And you know that if you tackle this task, it will be done appropriately, on time, and complete. And I think that's hard to let that go a little bit.
Sure. I think a lot of people who end up doing something like medicine feel that way, right? But I think, especially you have to recognize that there's a lot of, I think the kids are having a boxing match upstairs in our house right now. I can hear it.
I can't hear it.
Okay.
I will take care of that later.
I think it's recognizing too. I mean, as for me, especially, like, I have lots of other like coworkers who can all do like all these things. Like, it's not me saying that I'm the only one who can do all of these things. A lot of it comes just more from me wanting to be involved with too much. I think it's recognizing your limits. At what point your like you said earlier, your quality will start to suffer from that.
Yeah. Well, I think we should wrap it up there. I think the people are tired of hearing us drone on about our lives, but we've had lots of people for some reason be interested. I don't know. Maybe I'm a role model. I don't know if people want to be me or they just love me. I don't know what the reason is. Joking. But of course, we get a lot of questions about, how did you do this? And how did you do that? And not saying that we didn't have any role models, but if we could provide some amount of comfort or advice, we'll just say advice, to the younger people who are going through some of these things, I think that's helpful. So I think it's nice for them to hear, we didn't talk any shop on this episode, right? We didn't talk any surgery and how do you fix that and all this. And you and I do talk those things because we did go to the same residency and we're both well trained and we both do fun, different surgeries. And we do talk about that stuff at home. And it's nice to be able to bounce that off of each other. But I wanted this episode to be more, personal, to be more historical and help some of the students because there is a life outside of medicine. Sometimes we get bogged down in the nature of, how would you fix this? And what's the Johnson and Strom, stage 3 and blah, 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 blah. Right. And so life outside of medicine, I think, makes you a better rounded person, a better overall person, but it also keeps you grounded, because ultimately at the end of the day, that's what matters, is family, friends, life. Podiatry for us is a career. It's a job. But ultimately, I think it's more important, family, friends, life, like I said before. So I think we wanted to kind of leave that off here and then have you back on a future episode and kind of, show off some of your brain cells in the future and talk shop a little bit and go through some cases and have Leland on, and we can kind of go through some more in-depth things. So you have any parting words for the students or anybody listening?
Oh, that's a lot of pressure. No, I mean, I think, again, I think of the students a lot, right? Because that's my people in academia, is just to stick with it and know that it creates a great life. It's a great career. And it can be such a big part of your life, and being a physician and whatnot is definitely something that, encompasses a lot of parts of your life, but you can do a lot of things outside of it, and it creates a lot of avenues for that. And stay in contact with family and friends, and don't get too lost and caught up in all of this, because you're right, this is the career, it's what you do, but you got to maintain that life outside of the foot and ankle world.
I think that's reasonable. I forgot to say, I was going to start the episode and say, you fell in love with a handsome gentleman in school. Oh, unfortunately, it didn't work out between you two, and you met me. Forgot to say that. I'm going to leave that in.
Oh, shucks.
All right. So thanks for joining me on this episode of Pod Patrol. Stick with us as we have some future episodes coming up. We'll get Leland back in here. We'll have Ashley back on, and we'll kind of try to push forward and make it kind of an interesting podcast, I hope, as we move forward. So signing off on another episode of Pod Patrol, it's Dr. Ashley Dikis and Dr. Jeff Dikis. Until next time.